Hey everyone, how are you? Welcome to a brand new SPSM Chat. SPSM, it's what all the cool kids are doing. So you want to be a crisis center volunteer? Well, we've got the show for you. We've got Andy Brown in the house to talk about all the cool stuff that he's up to and more. I'm so excited. Before we get into that, though, if you're watching this live, if you're on the Twitter at SPSM Chat, of course, use that hashtag SPSM. If you're on Facebook, facebook.com/SPSM, youtube.com/SPSM Chat, facebook.com/SPSM Chat, mixer.com/SPSM Chat. Let us know where you're here. Let us know where you're from. Let us know what you do. Introduce yourself. Hang out with us for the next hour. We've got some conversation coming up. You want to talk about a real man's man. You want to talk about a real league leader. It's certainly not me. But before we get into him, let's get on to my second and only co-host for tonight. This should be fun. Give a little introduction to yourself.
Hi, my name is Joelle Murray. I am a peer specialist by training. I am autistic. I have OCD. I have some complicated physical chronic illnesses. I always stumble over that because it's like complicated. How do I say it short? Anyway, so I am a survivor of an attempt of suicide, and I'm still working on like saying that because I don't really talk about it explicitly, but I do talk a lot about having chronic suicidal thoughts, and that's something I'm very comfortable talking about. I'm just getting to the point where talking about attempting suicide. Anyway, so those are the lenses where I do my advocacy through, which is suicide prevention, mental health, and accessibility. Yeah, so.
Can you talk about for a minute just how much of a beast Andy Brown is?
I'm not sure that's for this audience, but I am happy to have him on SPSM tonight.
Without further ado, tell the whole world, the whole SPSM Chat, universe, galaxy, solar system, not only who is Andy Brown, but tell them who the true Ayatollah of rock and rolla is, who the true master and ruler of the universe is, the alpha and the omega, Andy Brown.
Right. So I'm Andy Brown. Right now I work for the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services as the Commissioner for Behavioral Health Services, which makes me the state mental health authority in Kansas. And so my responsibility is basically all things mental health and SUD in the state. And so I work on a lot of things, and every day is different. When I first started getting involved with SPSM Chat folks and suicide prevention was about 5 years ago. And I worked as the executive director at headquarters Crisis Center in Lawrence, Kansas, where I was executive director and sort of led our transition into doing more statewide advocacy and policy work. So it's been a really good ride, and I have been a huge fan of AAS conferences and all of the folks that have haunted the halls of SPSM Chat for the last 5 years. So it's great to be on the show, and I'm excited to talk about volunteering for crisis centers because that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. And we've got a lot of, I think, good questions coming up. So
Yeah, how
I'm
many
yours
times
for
have
the
you been
night.
on? How many times have you been on SPSM Chat?
This is my very first time live
Oh, right.
tonight.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm also celebrating my daughter's 6th birthday tonight. So
Yay.
I
Oh,
smoked.
she's not mad at you from stepping away to do this bullshit?
No, we already opened the toys. She's all good. So we have grandma and grandpa are in the living room keeping her company with ice cream. So we're all good. But
So,
we smoked some ribs and had some corn on the cob, and we are fed, ice creamed, presents opened, sung songs. We're good to go.
well, Joelle made shepherd's pie tonight, so there's that.
Yeah, shepherd's pie is one of my top favorites. I pick it up every time I'm at AAS when I hit the Irish pubs. So if you're at AAS with me, find me and we'll go to an Irish pub together and
But
get you some shepherd's pie.
you should issue a warning to people that you go hard, and you're not for everyone. Just be on the lookout for that, okay?
That's fair.
If you
That's
see
fair.
Andy Brown out on the town at a pub, especially, proceed with caution, but you will thank yourself in the morning.
Right. I
So-
will look
Well,
after
you won't.
I will.
Yes, I
Oh.
just want to give quick shout outs to Janine Hoff, who was our guest last week, and Amelia, who is all here for you. She is there. So I just want to ask a bonus question before we get into our 4 questions, our quadrupula. Is it true, Andy, that the Colossus of Rhodes was modeled after your body?
It's true. It's true. Yeah. The big golden statue guy with the torch. Yep.
Question number 1, and it is a doozy, and that would be, what are some key attributes of an effective crisis center worker? And before we get into this, Andy Brown, I just want to make sure that you give people a little bit more insight into what your full background is and history of crisis centers.
Yeah. So right now, crisis center stuff that I'm working on is related to FEMA's crisis counseling program in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency. So we are working in Kansas to stand up a statewide crisis counseling program that will serve Kansans from all walk of life that might be dealing with any kind of emotional trauma or mental crisis that they might be experiencing as a result of loss of income, relationship issues, whatever the crisis may resolve around. If it's COVID-19 related, we're working on trying to create that. And so one of the things that we're doing with that is we are supporting our NSPL structure here in the state by using some of those FEMA funds to increase the number of volunteer shifts that are being manned in our crisis centers. We're also working with our Department of Agriculture because our Department of Agriculture comes into contact with a lot of folks that are impacted by COVID-19 due to the impact that that's had on our beef packing plants, our pork processing plants, and the farmers and producers that grow produce and livestock that are going through some pretty difficult times right now. So it's a little unique in what we're trying to do, but all of that work is essentially being done by crisis counselors that are not academically trained, right? So in a sense, they're all volunteers, even the ones that work for the Department of Ag, because they're not professionals, they're paraprofessionals, right? And then prior to coming to the state and working for the state, I worked at the NSPL Crisis Center in Kansas. That's a statewide crisis center, and we utilized probably about 90% of our phone answering staff was all volunteer staff that were recruited and trained from our local community in Lawrence, Kansas. And I think it's a great model and a wonderful way to go when you're looking at who makes a good crisis counselor and how do you find them, those sorts of things. So if you have the motivation to do things as a volunteer, chances are we're going to have a good experience with you working as a crisis counselor.
Well, that's good to know.
Yep.
So, Joelle, what say you? Let's put the question back up on screen.
Sorry. I was just trying to say what NSPL is. And NSPL is
National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
Yes, acronym alert.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I just tried to switch over and just like put that up. What are some key attributes of an effective crisis center worker? So I think that it's hard to say that there's actually like one good type of person to have in a crisis center worker. Like there's some good things to have, but you also want to have like a diversity of workers. But basically, like you want to have people who know their boundaries very well and who know their skill set, who are very aware of what they're good at and what they're not good at, and who are comfortable with handing things over when they know that they are out of their element. And I think that is really, really important in any situation of support, but especially in situations of crisis support. And you want people who, again, are aware of their boundaries, who know when they need to, who know when they need to take care of themselves, who know when they personally need to step back. And I really feel like at least half of it is being aware of yourself. And the other half is, listening and making sure the other person is ready for you to respond and really being in tune with what they need and not what you think they need. So really tuning individually to each person. And again, asking for feedback from the people you work with and really taking that to heart, considering it constructive feedback, not considering it criticism or personal, because and if you're a supervisor, really offering constructive feedback because you're all there to help people.
Let me ask you, Joelle, would you make a good crisis center volunteer?
Yes, I'd prefer not to volunteer. I mean, so I've not been in a specific crisis center position, but I have dealt with a lot of crisis situations, and I've been comfortable and adept at doing so.
Let me ask you, Andy, would I make a good crisis center volunteer?
Yeah, so I think you'd make a great one. But here's the thing, right, is that I do feel like with the proper amount of training, right, you can turn just about anyone into a good listener, right? And good listening is probably the primary.
Well, I mean, Andy, like I'm the
I know
best
you're
listener
interrupting
in
me
the
now to make a
world,
point,
okay?
right?
No
So
one's a
that's
better
good.
listener than me.
But yeah, we do. We work on, a lot of skills building in order to try to make people ready to be in a situation where they're dealing with somebody that's in the middle of a crisis. But I will tell you that the majority of people that hesitate at becoming a crisis counselor are probably some of the best people that you want to be a crisis counselor, right? And so sometimes the ones that are like the most gung-ho and the most like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this and I'm going to rock at it, are the ones that struggle the most when they actually get into the situations where they're talking to somebody one-on-one in crisis. So things that might make you not a great crisis counselor are really things that are pretty circumstantial, right? So if for some reason you're just not capable of being empathetic at the time, right? That's really a no-go. It's hard for us to get people to be empathetic if that's not the space that they're in. And then the second one really is around the effectively communicating and listening to other people. And while we can train on listening, sometimes communicating back effectively can be difficult. So those are kind of the two things that I think really make a good candidate for a crisis program, is that you're a good listener and you have the empathy that's needed. And if we can get those two things, we can train you on the rest.
Well, I would definitely trust you, Andy Brown, to train me. Probably no one else. So if I ever go to Lawrence, Kansas, and I know a few cool people there. So Lawrence, Kansas is popping. I don't know what's in the water, but you got some great people over there.
You guys are only like a 10-hour drive from Lawrence now too, so.
Well, we haven't moved yet, but
okay.
We're getting closer and closer.
All right. Well, Denver, nice town. So.
Yes. Oh, we Patricia didn't realize SPSM Chat was back in business. We've been here since last August, but that's totally fine. I'm not going to make fun of you, but the fact that you found us is all good. Yeah, we've what do we how many co-hosts have we gone through yet? But we're doing good. I guess it's still technically SPSM 3.0, but thank you for checking us out. Patricia, me, Joelle Murray, other co-host Carly Larson, Joel Shorts, and who's the other one? Hudson Harris. There we go. So, Carissa wants to know: do you need any credentials?
Yeah. So, for what we've done in Kansas, we don't require a credential for you to become a crisis counselor. What we do is once you've been recruited, we put you through training, and that training, depending on what level of crisis counseling you're doing, is either going to be about a 8-week training where you'll be doing kind of 1-day training and some homework and some practice. And then we also do a sort of 8-hour training into 4-block sessions, along with some kind of quick start training. And that training, that core training that you receive, is then supplemented by additional ongoing training. And one of the things that we do a lot is work on helping experienced crisis trainers, utilizing people that have already had some time in the trenches and have done some of the work, then be sort of the role models and the peer coaches in the process, so that along the whole entire training period, you're getting some classroom training, you're getting some observation training, you're getting some peer training, and some book learning, right? And by the time you're done with all of that, you've had opportunities to role play. You've had opportunities to listen in on live phone calls and see what happens behind the scenes in the crisis center. And the entire time, your trainers are going to be available to help you process what you observed during your observation shifts. They're going to be there to support you when you're dealing with any emotional trauma that you might feel as a result of the crisis call you're on. So it's a very supportive process. And when we do crisis counseling, I think one of the most important things, and I think we're going to talk about it a little later in the show, is just kind of self-care and how we can make sure that our space is positive so that we can help other people that are in crisis.
All right. Hope that adequately addressed your question, Clarissa. So before we get into question number 2, I just want to catch people up if they're just joining on. The name of this show is So You Want to Be a Crisis Center Volunteer. Our guest, Andy Brown, is the person of the hour. Joelle Murray is my co-host. And as usual, me fashion, I forget to introduce myself. My name is Rudy Caceres, at Rudy Caceres on Twitter. I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone who helped make my storytelling event, Quarantine and Healing, Your Stories of Strength, Sickness, and Suckiness, a big success yesterday. So go check that out. You can check that out. It's the tweet that's pinned to the top of my Twitter. It's also on my Facebook page and YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rudy Caceres, facebook.com/Rudy Caceres. Go check that out. It's like 3 hours, but it's worth it. Lots of great stories. So thank you to everyone. Let's get back into the swing of things. Question number 2. What are the positives and negatives of utilizing crisis center volunteers as opposed to employees? Take it away, Andy Brown. Don't worry, I'm not picking on you. Oh, sorry.
Yep. Oh, now I'm unmuted. Okay. So one of the things that I think is important when you're looking at the difference between a volunteer crisis counselor and an employee crisis counselor is cost, right? So there's a pretty significant cost involved. If we were going to run a crisis center that was staffed entirely by master's level clinicians, for example, the cost of that is relatively astronomical in terms of our ability to adequately staff that to answer the volume of calls that come into the crisis center. So having volunteer crisis counselors, one of the advantages is that you can have more counselors answering more of the calls that come into the crisis center than you might be able to if you were solely a staff-funded crisis center. So the other thing that I think volunteers bring with them that can sometimes be difficult to parse out with paid employees is there's a wealth of lived experience that's out there, and oftentimes educational barriers present in a way that might limit their ability to gain credentials like we were just talking about, right? That would allow them to be staffed at a crisis center that required that in a paid employee. And so what we did at headquarters was we sort of used our licensed clinicians as supervisors, and then we used our volunteer staff as support to answer those calls on the line. So that's one way to go. We use a lot of paraprofessionals in other areas of mental health in order to try and reduce operational costs. And so things like peer support counselors, mental health techs, low-level nurses, those sorts of kind of paraprofessional, certified but not licensed type paraprofessionals allow you to reduce your overhead for running a facility like this. And unfortunately, one of the challenges within SPL, and I'm hoping I'm not airing a dirty secret, is that largely these things are not profitable ventures, right? So there aren't a lot of NSPL crisis centers that are making substantial amounts of funding available for hiring lots of staff. So by having volunteer staff, we get a lot of mileage out of that in terms of our answer rate. And it's also true that volunteers tend to have a closer lived experience to the callers that are calling in on those lines than someone who may be in a situation where they've gone out and got a clinical license and are used to doing therapeutic calls and interventions.
What say you, Joelle Murray? Question number 2.
What are the positives and negatives of utilizing crisis center volunteers as opposed to employees? I mean, I would say, just a lot of what Andy said, definitely the cost. But also what he said about kind of experience, but also I'd say, unfortunately, in a way, like diversity of experience. I think that, because of how our systems are set up, and he kind of got to this a little bit, I think that, you have more diverse people, it's more likely that you're going to get minorities as volunteers just because of the access to opportunities a lot of times to higher education. And I don't see a lot of clinicians, not a lot of clinicians, but as many clinicians who aren't white or who, don't have a similar background. And not that it doesn't exist, but we need to have that diversity. And I think if you are unfortunately pulling from a pool of people who don't have as high degrees, you're gonna not have as much diversity of experience. And I'm not at all saying people aren't intelligent or cannot get high degrees. I'm saying the way our systems are set up, you're not as likely to have as much of a pool. And so when you have volunteers working, you're going to be able to have a larger pool, and you're going to have people who have that lived experience. You're going to have people who are intelligent but can't access those degrees because of cost, but you want them there, you want them on your team, you want them supporting people. And like, unfortunately, we need to find a way to like give them a job by using their volunteer experience.
Right.
But like
Yeah.
if they give us that value, if they can volunteer for us, why can't we use that as their working experience, and then they can get that job? But maybe, I guess that's a whole other discussion, but like,
yeah, I'll be happy to come back sometime and we can talk long term about like workforce development and creating career
right.
ladders for people that are in peer positions to start with, because that's a very important thing that I'm still working on trying to get my head around how we can do that here in Kansas. But there's some states that I think have done a really good job of trying to move people through that process so that they can turn their lived experience into a career path.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that so much that happens to us makes it harder to go straight through. And if you're using us for us, and like people who have a harder time getting straight through, if you're using us for our experience and for our intelligence that we gained other ways, you have to give us the opportunity to get around and still be able to get up. So I think that unfortunately, the way things are, like having a volunteer base, you're going to get more diversity. You're going to get people who, like you said, relate more to the people who call in, because you just have that diversity that we need.
Let me give a shout out to Rebecca, because she just nailed it with the fact that volunteers are, in a situation where they maybe can have more empathy and more experience than somebody that might have a license. So thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah, and Amelia on Twitter says degrees and what is taught or not taught can be a detriment to crisis services work. Hashtag SPSM. Thank you for that, Amelia. I appreciate you joining us tonight. Clarissa had some follow-up questions. She was the one who asked about credentials. Clarissa says, I'm an elementary school counselor. So if we are licensed and want to get a higher license, we can use these as hours?
Well, so if the training that's being offered is part of your state's approved like continuing education units for your in Kansas, we call it the BSRB. It's the Behavioral Sciences Review Board. And they determine what counts towards higher level of licenses in terms of both hours and CEUs. So in Kansas, our requirement essentially is that for most people that are licensed, in order to move up to the next level of licensure, they need to be supervised by a higher level licensed clinician. And their practice hours underneath that supervision then count towards their next level of licensure.
All right, let's get on to question number 3. Thank you all for the great comments and questions. Question number 3, how can crisis centers help their volunteers avoid burnout? Let's go back to you, Andy.
Yeah, this one's exciting. This is like my favorite stuff, right?
Yes,
so
this is the most excited I've seen you in a long time.
Yeah, so one of the things that I feel like is super important in terms of maintaining volunteers and retaining them so that they put in, more than their minimum amount of hours, and they hang out and become part of your organization and stay with you for a very long time, is that you have to find ways to insert the fun, right? And it doesn't really matter what types of ways you do that. The key element is fun, right? So we're talking about volunteers that are on the phone talking to people that are suicidal, and they're doing that for maybe 4 or 8 hours a day, right? And they might be doing that once a month, twice a month, weekly, a couple of times a week, depends on what level of engagement you have with them, right? And to keep those folks coming back, they need to feel like they're part of a family, right? That they're part of a team, that the other counselors there have their backs, and that they can turn to them and rely on them for um, their own compassion to avoid compassion fatigue, right? And so looking at ways you can put the fun into your crisis center is really important, right? Um, so it doesn't matter if it's, um, you know, Rocky Horror viewings, or if it's chicken chucking contests, or ping pong tournaments, or, breakfast at, you know, Tiffany's style stuff, like whatever you're doing to make it fun is the important part, right? And sometimes the quirkier the better, right? Because that forms a sense of camaraderie. So, like a couple of things that headquarters did that helped build that team camaraderie were we had graduation parties where um, after everybody had been through their 8 weeks of training and been graduated on to take their first calls, we'd have a big cookout. There'd be lots of food. Everybody that was in the class would sort of be presented as graduation. And we would have other volunteers and board members and staff attending that ceremony. And they would give each other gifts. They would say little speeches. Sometimes they'd perform a song or a skit or do something else in front of everyone. Then, when they go back to say, we're done eating, we'd head out and do karaoke at a local bar for the night. And again, just having everybody together to do something fun helps build that sense of camaraderie and trust that you need in your counselor cadre, right? And that's how you keep things going. Chicken chucking, I suck at it, but it is a lot of fun.
You suck at chicken chucking?
Yeah, I've got an award on my wall for like worst chicken chucking ever.
What say you, Joelle Murray? How are your chicken chucking skills?
I don't think I've ever chucked a chicken.
How
I
much
have never.
chuck could a
chucked
chicken
a-
chuck?
We will
chuck-
totally
chuck-
chuck some
chuck?
chickens at the next AAS together. I will bring some
Okay.
chicken for you to chuck.
We gotta do karaoke though.
Yeah.
So how can crisis centers help their volunteers avoid burnout? So like I said, I haven't worked in a specific crisis center. I frequently work in positions which have high turnover and high burnout rates. And so for those experiences, I definitely think part of the training is that has helped me when I get training that emphasizes, awareness of like signs that you're approaching burnout, or giving me tools to decompress, that emphasize communication skills, not only with the people you're supporting, but with people you're working with your supervisors, that emphasize open communication skills, that emphasize that a conflict isn't a confrontation, in terms of like expressing what you need to do your job well, to do your job like competently. That kind of emphasize like we all want the same goal, and kind of reduce. So like I feel like I'm not sure, because I get different impressions of crisis centers in terms of how they're set up, and I think they are set up differently in terms of how much expertise there is, and what levels they're on. So places that I've worked at that have done very well in balancing kind of like the different roles and levels of expertise, levels of responsibility, they encourage approaching supervisors. They encourage approaching issues and they look at it as like a team effort to figure out things that aren't working, rather than you're screwing me over, or things like that. And like that can't always work, but if the entire organization just approaches it from that perspective, it kind of takes the pressure off of one particular person. And so those kind of things have definitely helped me in avoiding burnout and in reducing high turnover rate. And definitely like, reminding people that they're human, that they get tired, and that's okay. And you need to attend to that.
Yeah. One of the beauties of volunteer work is that if a supervisor recognizes that you are kind of being stressed out, burned out, have something going on that's impacting your ability to be effective as a counselor, there's no penalty to you taking a break, right? There's no cause for you to have to burn yourself out day in and day out
Mhm.
in order to pay your rent, right? So it really is, I think, beneficial to have a volunteer staff in your crisis center, not only because they can help with um, taking calls, but they can also help assist staff members that may have issues with burnout, right? So it's something where oftentimes having just like I said, kind of the camaraderie of additional people can help you through more difficult times, right?
Mhm.
So we have to peer counsel ourselves while we're doing peer counseling.
Right.
All right, so before we get on to our fourth and final question, just wanted to highlight Rebecca's comment. Sometimes if the volunteer, see if I can talk over this. Sometimes if the volunteer hears the person they actually talked with, reached out and got to a better place mentally and are now doing well, that does boost their confidence. They are doing a great service to the community and rotating the heavy days that are normally high call volume days. I think that's the whole comment. Great,
Yeah.
great comments, Chris. And Carissa, if I can't post a link right now, but if you just Google Crisis Center volunteer, you'll get some links. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Especially the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline website. They have a whole website dedicated to just that. April Foreman is in the house on Twitter. Hello, Doc. How are you? See, she shows up on the Twitter for the real VIP guest. Okay, she doesn't do that for anyone, Andy. Okay.
Hi, April. Thanks for tuning in.
Cool. Suicide and Crisis Center of North Texas says, excellent discussion. Thank you all. And thank you, uh, North Texas, for retweeting the Periscope stream. We all have one incredible volunteer who has been with us since 1984. Until just recently, she rarely missed her weekly 4-hour shift. We love her. She has inspired generations with her passion and service that sounds like a keeper. Thank you, Suicide and Crisis Center of North Texas, if that is your real name. Let's get on to...
I know who you are.
Yeah, did you have any
We
follow-up
love
comments, Joelle, before we get into the fourth and final question?
I mean, I thought that question was also about employees because we'd gone back and forth, and so I feel like I wasn't paying attention at all. I feel like I was answering a completely different question. So
no, the only reason is because I
yeah.
couldn't fit volunteers and employees into the same graphic. But no, that's...
so all those things I said as it applies, but also volunteers want to be appreciated. They want to feel like they're appreciated and not being used.
Yep.
So
celebrate
I have
them.
been in, yeah, like Andy said, celebrate them. So I have been in situations where we have volunteers and they aren't treated well. They're definitely volunteers, and it's very clear they're volunteers, and they're not part of a team, and they're not, they're taken for granted. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Speaking of not getting treated well, let's get to question number 4, the fourth and final question. What are some reasons crisis centers use volunteers, and how might pay affect the work that crisis center... Did we get to this one already?
I might have dived into it early, maybe.
Okay. Well, I did want to ask a question about inequality, and I feel like I've messed that up. So, and this goes out to everyone in the comments as well on the Twitter. So basically, the fourth and final question I did want to ask was related to inequality and discrimination. And so what can crisis centers, because it's the hot topic right now, Andy, I don't know if you know the latest tea, but what can crisis centers do to address inequality, discrimination, racism, all the isms, and really, really talk to talk as opposed to just putting out the tweet and hoping that everything blows over?
Yeah. So it's 100% not good enough just to put out a message, right? So my time with crisis center programs was not exactly coincided with, but was very close to the same timeline as the Black Lives Matters timeline. And so one of the things that I think is important is that the crisis center has to be a place that people can turn to when they're in need. And they have to feel a sense of trust. And that trust has to come from the fact that the crisis center is engaged in the community that it serves, and not just the majority of the people in that community, but also the minority and the people that feel like they are in the most need at the time. And so when I was in the executive director position, we worked with our board of directors to come up with policies that promoted inclusivity. We worked to create a board matrix so that we could identify POCs to serve on the board of directors and recruit them. We worked, and not just POCs, but also like LGBTQ and other groups that are oftentimes subject to being persecuted, right? So then we went ahead and we put out, a strong, statement of support, because even if you're walking the walk, you still need to talk the talk, right? And we engaged with the community by going to rallies and being present at rallies to assist with any kind of counseling, grief counseling, that kind of stuff. We worked on things like our campus involvement around Black Lives Matter was pretty large at the time. So those kinds of things show you as being an ally to the community, and they connect you in a way that allows you to draw volunteers into your crisis center from those communities. And then those voices are the voices that are heard when people call your crisis line, right? So it's not, it's not a situation where you can be inauthentic. And it's certainly, in my opinion, any organization that I'm in charge of or am trying to lead, I'm going to be pushing for greater inclusivity, more representation, better community outreach, more transparency. I mean, those are the things that make a difference in this time. So throwing that out there.
Yeah, and one of the things that was made obvious this week is that people need to call it out within their organizations. Yes, you'll probably be fired or forced to quit, or you will quit just because you can't sleep at night or look yourself in the mirror working for an organization that has racist leadership, basically. And so I salute everyone who's working in their organizations, calling out racism and being the change. And it's not easy. It makes people uncomfortable. It can cost people their jobs and can create all kinds of drama. But in the end, it's for the better.
Well, and when you're in a situation where you're on the outside and you don't have influence over the organization directly, one of the things that I think can be very beneficial is to work on sort of the promotion and the education of those values within the organization. And so I think that there are oftentimes challenges in leadership that can cause people to drift from their mission. And I think there's also challenges in leadership that can cause people to abandon their values. And those two things really, I think, are very key in any organization is that from the top down, everybody needs to understand what the purpose of the organization is and have a clear understanding of what the vision for the future is based on the values of the organization. And if you can achieve that organizationally through retreats, conferences, board meetings, committees, then that will help steer the organization as a whole in a positive direction.
Yeah, and thank you, Andy. I really appreciate that. Like the stuff that you're talking about really needs to get done, and I'm glad that you're helping lead that in your own organization. So kudos. You are a
Thank
good
you.
white person.
I try to be.
Yes. I did want to just get back to the pay issue just a little bit before I forget, because we had some tweets at us earlier today basically saying that crisis centers who don't pay everyone are somehow, to put it in my own words, are basically exploiting people for free emotional labor. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that very little happens in the United States without volunteers at its base, right? So, if you think about all the things that you have to do as a volunteer, there's trying to work on the PTA at your kid's school. There's, coaching. There's, the volunteers that run the polls where we vote, volunteers that run soup kitchens. I mean, volunteers, if we didn't have a volunteer base in this country, very little human services programs would actually happen, right? And that's not to say that it's okay to take someone, require them to work 40 hours a week as a volunteer, and then not recognize their accomplishments, right? But there's, frankly, like in the United States, we rely on volunteers to accomplish the majority of the humanitarian work that we do. And regardless of what that category of human service is, you're going to find that probably 80% of the work that's actually being done that helps people is being done by a volunteer. And that's just how our system is set up. And I am super happy to listen to people that feel like that system is set up unfairly. But it is a reality that, just another organization I'm involved with is Boy Scouts of America. Boy Scouts of America has one employee per district, right? And something like, maybe 700 volunteers. And that differential of like ratio of 1 to 700, and trust me, the one guy isn't making a ton of money either. Those kinds of things only happen because of the volunteering that takes place in the community. So whether you're volunteering through a church or a nonprofit or some kind of club, sports organization, government work, those kinds of things should be recognized and rewarded. You should feel good about doing them. You should feel a sense of accomplishment. You should not be treated poorly based on your volunteerism. But it is very true that you have to do a lot of volunteering in order to build a community in the United States.
Yeah, Doc Foreman, sorry, I just want
to.
Doc Foreman says we should pay for trained crisis care and then hold the system to a standard of care. That's one way.
Yeah, I'd argue you're probably not going to find enough trained clinicians.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's sarcasm or not, but keep on commenting, Doc Foreman. We appreciate you. Let's get to Joelle. And if you just want to talk about the inequality issue, you're more than welcome to, Joelle. So it's all up to you.
What was that question?
What
can crisis?
Yeah, basically to address and eliminate inequality from within.
So I mean, just in general, organizations, I think that they don't value diversity in general. Like, not as so many of them, even if they say they value diversity, they value it as just like this thing that we're supposed to have. But the reality is that diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of values, to an extent, if it doesn't mesh with the organization, like that's going to be difficult. But diversity in general makes for a stronger base. And so like for one thing, realizing that and coming from that perspective, you want so many different people from different backgrounds, different experiences, different processes of thought, different ways that they engage with the world. You want that because then you have filled in all these holes of problem solving, of like where you need support, where you can give support. It's just, and it boggles my mind that people don't see that. So first of all, you have to see like all these amazing things that you can gain from having a diverse staff, a diverse board, a diverse team of supervisors, diverse volunteers. So you have to come at it from that. And second of all, like you have to be asking, first of all, the people you're serving, are they getting what they need? Are they seeing people who, or getting served by people who are understanding where they're coming from? And if not, you have to seek out those people and support them to work with your organization. If there are barriers that are keeping them from working with your organization and they want to, you need to support them to get here. Are there transportation issues? Are there education issues? Are there healthcare issues? Like, are some of your, even with volunteers, are some of your volunteers having issues with medications or things like that? And like, this sounds like a stretch, but it's not. Are some of your volunteers having health issues that's interfering with their ability to volunteer, and it's something that they really want to do in some way? Mm-hmm. You have to offer a support network for everyone who is involved in your organization. And by doing that, you then increase your diversity of experience, you increase your pool of knowledge. So like, you have to come at it from that. And also, you always have to increase accessibility issues, whether it's physical accessibility or it's communication or language. You have to make that a priority. You have to budget for it. You have to budget for outreach to get these valuable people involved with your organization. And you have to constantly ask, what are we not doing enough of? And you have to like invest in learning about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add, like, I was thinking about that as you were saying that. And one of the things that I would add too is like, you have to be intentional, right? Mm-hmm. Diversity doesn't happen on its own. Right. You can't just say like, oh, we embrace it and let it happen. You have to be intentional. You have to go out, you have to seek it, you have to build it. You have to put it into place in a way that it's going to be a permanent part of your organizational structure. Right. Mm-hmm. And if you don't build those policies, if you don't create that structure, it's just not going to happen by itself. And there's thousands of examples of that out there. And, even with our recent tea that Rudy was referring to, like we are in a situation where there is plenty of opportunity for us to be present and to be accountable and look for ways that we can be inclusive intentionally, so that we're not just waiting for it to happen and saying like, well, we're open to it.
And on that note, it is time for final thoughts. And since we're already on you, what are your final thoughts for tonight, Andy Brown?
The final thoughts are, if you're not a good leader, get out of the way and let somebody else do it.
Yes, and this is usually the time for shameless self-promotion, but you're not the influencer type that we usually have on. But if there's anything you do want to promote, or just give shout-outs to people or organizations, that's great too.
Yeah. Well, I'll give a shout out to headquarters because they're the reason I'm on the show today. And they are, right now they're answering phones, taking calls, doing their work. And again, 90% volunteers, man. So, gotta have them.
Speaking of gotta have them, final words, Joelle Murray.
Like Andy said, be intentional and don't make promises you can't keep. Yep. Like, if you're working on something, tell people you're working on something, be transparent, tell them the steps that you are taking. Don't make promises in an effort to look like you're doing something.
Also, don't be racist.
Right.
That's my final thoughts.
Yeah.
Don't be accidentally racist. Be an intentional community builder.
There we
waiting for
go.
that.
Okay, so before we go home, just want to give some more last minute shout outs. Rebecca says you have to have people that have the passion to help others. Andy Brown, you are the one who does. Thank you. Andy Brown is a boss and all around best human being. I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Doc Foreman. Thank you for all of your mentorship and the good things that you do as well. Andy Brown is consistently value driven leader with integrity. You need to collect these for your LinkedIn recommendations, Andy.
Right.
Rebecca says, and everything has the same opportunity and maintain a great line of open communication. Nisa says on Twitter, I am so glad you were talking about this. I am starting a new job with the Crisis Respite Center in Manhattan, NYC as a peer specialist supervisor of the other peers. This is so helpful to hear. Best wishes, Nisa. I've been following your journey for 4 or 5 years at this point.
Yeah.
So,
and Nisa, there's a really cool peer Facebook group for New York City peer specialists. So look for
I think
it if
she
you're
runs
not
that
part of
group
it.
probably. So.
Oh, well, that'd be awesome too. Congratulations.
Yes. Okay, awesome. I think I got to everything. And thank you for your comments, Clarissa, as well. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you, everyone else. And thank you to Andy Brown.
Yeah,
I
glad to be
appreciate
here.
you. I know this is kind of last minute thing, so thank you for hanging out with us. I'm glad I didn't scare you off at AAS last year, so that's awesome.
You'd have to do an awful lot to scare me off.
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there. No worries. And thank you, Joelle Murray, for being my co-host. We made it. It was just us. I think this is the first time that it's just been me and you, Joelle.
I think so. Yeah. That's
Yes. That's so romantic. Okay, that's going to do it for this week. Stay tuned. We'll announce a guest in the very near future, probably in the next day or so. So make sure you're following us on Twitter at SPSM Chat, Facebook.com/SPSM Chat, YouTube.com/SPSM Chat, Mixer.com/SPSM Chat, and you can learn more. You can learn all the things, watch past shows, including Doc Foreman era shows, the golden years, as some would say. SPSMchat.com. Thank you. That's going to do it. And I'm going to let Andy Brown give the sign off. So take it away, Andy.
So no matter what you do or where you go, SPSM Chat is here for you.
Oink, oink.